and welcome to An Evening with Nirvana. It's a podcast where I'm talking to a series of guests from the Doom community, and maybe some people outside of it too, about things like level design, map creation, MIDI making, and other facets of game development. My guest for this episode is someone you may know as Moldy, creator of the CACA award-winning Doom mods Going Down and The Eye, and also the recently released Overboard, which, after playing it, will probably also win a CACA award. You may also know him as Syriac, either because it's his name or for his animation on YouTube, and in other places. He's created animation for music videos such as Bonobo and Block Party, and several of his surrealistic videos have received over 100 million views on YouTube. So without further ado, welcome Cyriac, or Moldy.
Hey there, yeah, you can call me whatever, I don't mind.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Maybe I'll just jump between just to keep you on your toes.
I can't actually remember why I'm called Mouldy on the internet. It's just one of those internet names that I made up years ago, and I just kept using it for some reason.
Yeah, I was a little bit curious because it's unusual. I mean, it has sort of your sense of humor in it, I feel like.
I guess so. I mean, you know how it is on the internet. You just pick a random word when you're using a forum or whatever, and so there's no meaning behind it. It's just a funny word that I thought of and used ever since.
Yeah. I mean, mine is just after the band when I was like a teenager making my
right. I was wondering about that because isn't there a Doom map called Nirvana? Well, there's probably several of them.
Yeah, there's Doom, I think, what is it? Doom 2, map 26 or something, I think. It's a Sandy Peterson map, and it's terrible, I will say.
I can't remember which one it is. His maps are always kind of either terrible or the best.
Yeah, exactly. It's the one where you spawn in the room and it's just med kits everywhere in that square, and then the television.
Oh, that one. Yeah, a lot of people really hate that one.
Yeah. I don't know if my opinion is strong enough on it to hate it.
I've never understood why people hate that map.
Yeah, it's
so much.
Fine.
Then
it gets a seal of fine. I think it's just okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, I always start with the boring question, which I'm not sure if you've ever done an interview regarding Doom. You've done a lot about your animation, obviously, but not sure about Doom.
Yeah, I think I did a podcast for some other guys about Doom, but I cannot remember anything that I said, so it'll all be new to me.
Oh, that's good. That's what I want to hear. So yeah, I suppose, how were you sort of introduced to Doom in the first place? What was your initial experience with the game?
Right. Well, I guess the first time I ever saw Doom was around a mate's house back in the 90s, probably pretty soon after it came out. And I just remember being completely blown away by it and thinking, how is this even possible? Because I mean, I was really into video games at the time, but that meant like kind of arcade games and home consoles, and Doom was like light years ahead of that somehow. So then of course I didn't have a computer back then, so I just had to kind of hijack my dad's PC and play it whenever I could. And yeah, from there I just I eventually got a PlayStation and played Doom on that for the next few years until I eventually got my own computer and just kept playing it because it was still fun to play, even though there'd been a lot of other games since then that were kind of graphically a lot better. There was just something about Doom that just kept you playing because it was just fun, you know?
Yeah. And so you didn't really... A lot of people, when I talk to them, they play when they're a little kid or something and then they come back to Doom. Did you actually just like play it pretty consistently over the years then?
Pretty consistently, yeah. Because I've been playing games since the 80s and I've been pretty heavily into it. So the idea of playing old retro games it's always been kind of natural to me. If a game is good, then I'll play it regardless of how old it is. So I've always kind of kept up with playing old games, and so it just if it's fun, then I play it. And yeah, I didn't really. I mean, I might have had a few breaks here and there where I got distracted by other stuff. But yeah, it's pretty consistently. Although I haven't played it for a few years now, because I got a bit sucked into the world of roguelike games when I got hooked on the Binding of Isaac, and I'm still kind of playing those kind of games at the moment. So Doom's kind of been put on the shelf for a bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you sort of what other games you played. I suppose more when you were younger rather than more recently.
Well, when I was younger, I mean, I've been playing games since Pong pretty much. I mean, that's how far back I go. So
NRG.
Yeah, just about anything you can think of, I've probably played.
A serial game.
Yeah, but mostly kind of action type shooters and stuff like that. I'm not so much into RPGs and stuff.
Oh, okay, interesting. Because I mean, I definitely think of you as someone who likes a story, even in your Doom ones, which I'll get to a bit later. But I'm surprised that you're not an RPG guy.
Yeah, well, the thing about stories in games, it's weird because I'm totally not interested in stories in video games. For me, the story of a game is you actually playing it, and that's why Doom always appealed to me, because there was no story. You were kind of in the game, and it was just whatever you wanted to do. So you're making the story as you go along with your own experiences.
Yeah, for sure. So when did you get interested in like actually making custom content for the game? Had you done anything like that for previous games, or was Doom the first foray?
Well, I've messed around with like shoot 'em up construction kit type things back in the 90s, I guess. And since then, I got into Left 4 Dead quite heavily, and made a couple of custom maps for that, which were pretty poor, I have to say. And other than that, I've kind of messed around. If games have their own kind of level editors built into them, then I have a go, but not very seriously. It's just for a bit of fun. Doom, how did I get into custom Doom stuff? I think what happened was at some point in the 2000s, the version of Doom I was playing on my PC, it stopped working properly with the latest version of Windows for some reason. So I started looking around for other ways to play it. And that's when I discovered source ports, which is when I discovered Doom World, because they were kind of hosted a list of all the source ports, and they also had a list of editing software. And I thought, I might have a go at that. And from there, I discovered the forums, because they have lots of tutorials and stuff. And I guess from there, I saw people kind of posting their maps. So I thought, I might as well just get involved in this. And that's how it all started, I suppose.
What was the first editor you used? Was it Doom Builder, the first one?
Yeah, the original Doom Builder, I think.
Yeah. I'm sort of curious, just based on like the stylistic things you do in your maps, which of the IWADs you actually enjoyed the most?
Well, I guess for nostalgic reasons, I'd have to say probably Doom 2, because it's the one I played the most. But then, I don't know, because I had a kind of a weird introduction to all the different IWADs, because I started off playing Doom, just the first one, and then I got the PlayStation version of Doom 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But they didn't have mouse support on the PlayStation for those games, so I didn't really play them so much. But then they brought out Final Doom on the PlayStation, and that did have mouse support, so I played that mostly. And that was TNT and Plutonia.
Yeah.
So I played those a lot, but they were kind of abridged versions of those iWads, so they didn't have all the maps. And they didn't even have all the monsters, actually. So it wasn't until I got my own PC and played those iWads that I discovered things like Archviles existed, which is kind of a...
Those weren't on the PlayStation one.
No.
Jeez.
So that was quite a harsh kind of awakening.
Especially in Plutonia, like map 1 has that Archvile that's super obnoxious in it. That's a rough one.
Yeah, so I kind of and by that point, I when I was playing on my own PC, I just had a disc with all of the iWads maps, and you could just pick any one you wanted. So I didn't really differentiate between all the different ones. But the map I remember enjoying more than any of the others was always. What was it? Map 16 of Doom 2? Is that the suburbs?
That sounds correct, yeah.
Yeah, that map really I spent a lot of time with, just because you can run around right from the start and trigger every monster in the map to appear at once. And then just hide somewhere and watch them all fight each other, or you can run around and have an army of monsters chasing you and stuff. And that was just like pure fun, you know. And it's, I guess that's the kind of the spirit of what I've been trying to reproduce with all of my maps. Is that's just that feeling of this great big playground where you're just murdering stuff.
Nothing like murdering things at a playground.
Yeah.
Well,
playgrounds of death.
Yeah. Well, to harken back to earlier, actually, that is a Sandy Peterson map 16.
Yeah, and I've discovered since then that a lot of the maps he made are my favourites, just for that reason, that they're so non-linear that you can just attack them however you want in various different ways. That's another thing I always try and kind of put into my maps, where you do have options of how you're going to approach them, because it just means it can be different every time you play it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely found... I mean, Going Down is definitely like that in a lot of maps, but Overboard even more so seems to encapsulate that kind of idea. It
does make things difficult, though, when you have a lot of complicated triggers
yeah, it does.
involved.
Especially in terms of mitigating, like skips and sequence breaks and things like that.
Sequence breaks, I mean, yeah, sometimes they're part of the fun. Sometimes I make these things so complicated that I end up surprising myself with some kind of weird combination of traps that I've triggered, and it ends up like a feature of the map.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing is definitely a great way to map, and also leaving that stuff in when it's, when it works to leave it in makes a big difference to how fun a map is. So the Doom Wiki sort of puts the Eye as your first official release. I mean, that map is obviously very well put together for a first release. I was curious, like, how much mapping you'd done prior to that WAD coming out.
Right. Well, the first map that I actually made was, I think it was called Bad Blood or something, and I posted that on the forum. I don't think I posted it to ID Games though, to the archive, because it ended up in I think it was Nova, the community project, because it was like my first ever map. That was just me trying to work out how to use the editor. So it's basically just a bunch of different kind of areas that aren't really related to each other, where I was trying things out and yeah. But by the time I'd done that, I was ready to do something a bit more kind of proper, which is when I did the eye.
Well, even then,
which turned
still pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, I think I spent a long time making the eye because I figured this whole Doom mapping thing would probably just be a passing phase for me. So that might be the only map I ever make. I may as well make it a good one. So I spent a lot of time crafting this kind of epic first map and probably last map, and of course, because it was one of the first maps I made, I didn't really have a good handle on how to do combat. I was still in the phase of mapping where you just think, oh, I'll make a nice looking room and then I'll throw some monsters in and the monsters will figure out the gameplay. They'll just leave them to do it. And yeah, and that doesn't really make for an interesting map, I find. Mm-hmm. So after I did that, I kind of thought, I could probably do better than this, really. I think at that point, I figured I had to kind of go back to basics and learn how to make a Doom map that was just fun to play. So that's when I started getting involved in community projects, just to kind of try things out and experiment a bit.
Mm-hmm. The map's obviously like incredibly detailed, but it just uses all stock textures, I think, which is interesting. Is there a reason you didn't use any custom textures for it?
Yeah, just because I didn't know how to.
Oh, okay.
I'm not that technically minded, so I just stuck with whatever I had, and I mean, building something that looks nice isn't very difficult if you have kind of artistic tendencies anyway. Doom is kind of like any kind of illustration tool, vector illustration tool. You can build interesting looking stuff, and but it is also, I mean, that map was also a kind of a learning process for texturing and stuff like that. Yeah. I guess because I guess this Overboard is the only time I've actually used custom textures, to be honest.
Yeah, I think going down as well is all. I think it's all stock.
Yeah, pretty much. There's towards the end I started adding some extra bits and bobs just for the story, but otherwise it's all just the original Doom 2 textures.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I was like, this must be like a conscious creative choice, much like Gazebo with some of his things that we all thought were conscious choices, but turns out you just
well, it kind of was, because I mean, by the time I was making Going Down, I knew how to actually like use custom textures, but
right.
I just thought I wanted to see how far I could push the original ones, because they're kind of old and clunky, but they're pretty versatile as well in terms of the variety of like materials that they are and colours and stuff. Well, that was kind of, that was part of the challenge. I mean, making a whole megawad is a challenge in itself, but I kind of gave myself the extra challenge of trying to make every map look kind of different as well. Mm-hmm. So I had to plan out which textures I'd use for which maps, and yeah, that was interesting.
Well, that was sort of what I thought. I guess. I suppose maybe a bit of a reach, but like like it does give going down like a very specific feel to it. The fact that you sort of played with offsets and did all this stuff with the stock textures, and I watched a video of you doing some of your animation, and when you were sort of animating, I think it was one of the cat videos, and you sort of cut pieces of the cat out to make more pieces of the cat to do something.
It's a similar thing. I mean,
yeah,
that's part of my whole thing with animation is that I tend to use particular bits of found footage and just manipulate them to the extreme. And I guess it's kind of related in the end. It's just I was talking to someone about this the other day where he said some artists are kind of like editors and other artists kind of conjurers or something. They just think of stuff in their head and they want to make it, whereas the editors want to take stuff that is already there and edit it into something new. And that's kind of that's more how I am. If I start with a completely blank canvas, I get a bit kind of lost. I need to have something that I can rearrange into something else.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of... This was the connection I was hoping to make, and then I could pretend I was very clever.
Yeah, no, well, I think you're right. Because, I mean, in the end, if I wanted to make a video game, I could probably learn how to make one from scratch or whatever. But I prefer to try and use existing games and push them and see what I can do with them. You know, that's just kind of more interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I'm curious what your actual sort of P-Watt inspirations were at the time when you made the eye.
I think I was probably playing a lot of Scythe 2 at the time. Maybe Deus Vault, because that had that similar kind of epic scale to it that I wanted to try and achieve.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. In the architecture,
I don't
also
think I've played Sunder yet. I'm not sure, but Sunder was something that really had a big influence on me at some point. Just for the way he uses the color schemes in those maps, they're very striking.
Yeah, it's certainly not like a connection I would initially make. Is Sunder is a big influence, but I'd be interested.
No.
Yeah. What do you think that influenced for you? Just sort of working with color and stuff.
Yeah, well, when I was making Going Down, I wanted to make sure every map had its own kind of color scheme. So Sunder was kind of something I was inspired by in that sense.
Mm-hmm. So with the eye and also Going Down and Overboard as well, they like I wouldn't necessarily call them slaughter wads, but they definitely like have some teeth to them. Do you think like difficulty is like a sort of a big part of making stuff? Do you have a specific difficulty range you're aiming for, or is this just like what's fun for you?
I don't know. At some point, I just decided I wanted to make difficult maps because I guess because I grew up in playing games in the 80s when arcade games were the big thing, and they just kick your ass all the time for the fun of it, you know. So I kind of map with that arcade sensibility where it's probably going to kill you unfairly, but you come back to it and with a bit of knowledge and learn how to beat it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I was always a big fan of the Ghouls and Ghosts series of games.
Right, I've heard of them but never played them.
Yeah, they have some very trollish kind of moments in them, which a lot of people would probably find unfair, but they're also kind of hilarious to me.
They were,
yeah.
Yeah, they went.
I mean,
Sorry.
the maps that I made, they end up being a bit slaughter-ish. They're not. I wouldn't call them. I wouldn't say I'm trying to make slaughter maps. It's just that I like killing a lot of stuff, and so I put a lot of stuff in my maps for you to kill. But it's all just so random and chaotic that, yeah, I don't know. Slaughter maps I tend to think of as a bit more organised than that, you know?
Yeah, that is probably the distinction I would make as well. Is that there's a bit less sort of attempt to structure the map, like your maps into like here's a fight kind of thing. It's more like you let the monsters flow into like motion, space, and stuff.
Yeah, I'm more interested in just constantly trying to surprise the player with new things, and so as you run around the map, you're just spawning more and more kind of surprises until there's too many of them.
I found that with Overboard.
In a sense, you can control how much of a slaughter you're going to get just by how much you kind of panic and snowball the whole thing. But
death by overstimulation.
I've made a couple of slaughter maps here and there though, just for fun. Because I mean, I played a lot of slaughter maps just because they are fun. Because just that feeling of having overwhelming odds against you and just a complete war zone with stuff flying everywhere. It's just a good time, really.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's definitely the stuff that I tend to play the most and make the most. So between the Iron going down, you sort of took part in quite a few community projects. I think Doom 2 in name only and a few others. Do you find that community projects were like good mapping practice, or did you mostly just join them for like the fun?
Definitely good mapping practice. I'd really recommend it because you just get so much feedback. Because you got, I mean, generally with these projects, everyone's maybe doing 1 or 2 maps in the whole thing. So you post your map on the thread, and you've immediately got like a dozen other mappers looking at it and trying it out and telling you things aren't working and stuff. So yeah, you get, not only do you get a lot of feedback, you get to see a lot of other people's attempts at mapping and learn from them and learn from their mistakes and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just generally good.
And also different perspectives on the same theme as well, which can be interesting.
Yeah, you get a lot of kind of variations, and you can kind of get a lot of ideas as well. It helps to do if you're kind of on. I guess it helps if you're on the same mapping level as everyone else in the project. I mean, if they're all kind of super mappers and you're a bit crap, then I don't know, you might feel like a bit of a fish out of water. But at the same time, if everyone is crap, then you're just going to get a megawad full of 30 crap maps. So I don't know how much that would help.
That's true. Yeah, I think I do agree that I think like the best projects tend to be the ones where there's a good mix. Like there's a series, the Joy of Mapping series hosted by Jimmy, and usually that's like there will be quite a few experienced mappers, and they are sort of paired to sort of help out newer mappers, and that works quite well, I think.
The other good thing about doing those community projects is I can try experiments that I might not necessarily want to put in a normal map, just because you can kind of come up with weird ideas that, I don't know, just kind of I mean it's a lot of the maps I did in those community projects were great examples of what not to do, basically. That's what I learned from a lot of these maps, is this is how not to do it. So that by the time Going Down came along, I kind of had a good idea of what was bad and what was okay.
Right. Well, I was wondering, because Doom 2 in name only, the whole concept was kind of like the whole thing is like a play on words, and obviously your maps have a lot of personality and generally have like a lot of like a big sense of fun about them. So I was wondering if it kind of appealed to you to like be able to flip these original maps on the head a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's why I joined that project. I just liked that whole idea of taking just the name of the map and seeing what would be inspired by it, you know?
Mm-hmm. And with regards to Going Down, how did the original concept come about for that? Did you have like the story originally, or was it just more mapping that then you added the story to later?
With Going Down, I think by the time I wanted to start that, I mean, I'd done a load of maps for community projects, and I felt like I wanted to do something of my own, and I wanted to do something specifically, because that's one thing you lose with a community megawad, is that sense of continuous progression through the maps, like one is related to the next, is related to the next kind of thing. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do like a series of maps where each one was like connected to the next in some way. So then the whole premise of that megawad just kind of wrote itself, basically, because one of the restrictions I had was that they're going to be really small maps. I decided, because that's the only way I'm ever going to be able to do a big project, is by making it out of lots of little bits. So then I was thinking, well, how is that going to work? How are these maps going to be connected to each other and spatially if they're all small? And then I just thought, well, set them in a building and each map is a floor. That just made logical sense. And then from there you just think, well, how do you get from one map to the next? And obviously you use the elevator,
Obviously, yeah.
and then you start thinking, well, why would you get off the elevator, piss around on that floor and then go back to it? Yeah. So then you think, well, let's just have a key. Every map has a key that you have to get to the next floor down. So it's just like, logically, it all builds itself in the end. And the original concept was just going to be like maybe 7 maps or something, just enough to take it to the first like intermission screen or whatever. But then I was thinking, well, this idea I've had, I'm starting on the bottom floor and going to the top floor. But if I start at the top and go downwards, then I can just keep going and make more maps.
Yeah. And
not only that, but the maps that go underground aren't constrained by the walls of the building, so they can start getting more interesting. Mm-hmm. So then I started thinking, how many maps could I actually make? And that's when the kind of the one-man megawad idea kind of came about, so I started thinking, right, can I possibly make 32 maps out of this concept? So then I had to kind of make a list of all the maps and the scenario of each one and how they would all be different from each other, and so the whole megawad was planned in advance before I even started mapping it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was going to ask you, like, if you did a lot of pre-planning for your mapping in general.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't do a lot of pre-planning for anything in general, like any of my videos or anything else. If a video is going to be like a long project, then I'll do like a very rough storyboard and stuff, just so that I know what I'm kind of doing at every particular point.
Hmm.
because you don't want to ever get in a long project to a point where you don't know what you're doing next, because then you start kind of getting bored with it and maybe get distracted by other projects, and then you never end up finishing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, with going down, I knew this would take months to make, so I had to have a very regimented plan of how I was going to go about it. Every map was kind of listed, and the concept of the architecture, the look of it, the gameplay of it, and that for every map that was kind of noted either on paper or in my head. And so I could always, like, as soon as I finish one map, I'm straight onto the next one, and I know what it's going to be, and I can just start it straight away. So I could get like a production line going for all these maps. That's the only way I could ever finish this thing.
Yeah. And that's why you're the only person to ever have done a one-man megawatt that actually got finished.
Well, I do wonder actually how long it must take other people to do these one-man megawatts. I mean, at the end, it ended up taking me a year, which I'm imagining is pretty good going.
Yeah, I think so.
For a project like that.
I can think of a few other people who've actually followed through on it, but like 80% of Doomworld is like, alright guys, here's the devlog for my one-man megawatt, and there's like 3 maps, and then you never see them again.
Yeah, it's quite a big... I mean, it's one of those kind of challenges like writing a book that I give myself sometimes just for the challenge of it, you know.
Right.
I mean, to be honest, I don't really like playing 30 maps of Doom in a row. I'm not sure if anyone else does, but it's just this kind of this personal challenge that you give yourself to make that many maps, because it is the most that you can make.
Well, the fact that it is planned out and there's cogency to it and a clear goal and you know, okay, I know I'm like there's an end to this story really helps pull you through to the end, I think, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of what I was missing from a lot of the other megawatts I was playing. So it's why I went to the effort of trying to make this thing feel like you were always progressing, and you were progressing towards something, even if you couldn't see what that was. You're always kind of waiting to see what the next map would be, because you knew it would be different from the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when I'm playing megawads and they have like 5 maps in a row that are, I don't know, tech base or sewers or something, you start to get a bit kind of fatigued by them after a while.
So in terms of like the visual storytelling that takes place in your maps, you know, going down and Overboard as well, perhaps an even greater example of it. Do you think a lot of that comes from like your animation background? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I just like telling stories. I mean, before I was animating, I was writing a lot of stories, and I still do, and everything. I mean, I always think of things in terms of stories, even if it's like music that I'm making, or even if it's just an animation of a bloody sheep mutating into weird shapes. I'm always thinking of it in terms of the story structure, where it begins, where it ends, where the journey that it takes you on. That's kind of what interests me. So when I'm making Doom maps, I try and, I guess it's kind of unconsciously instill some kind of a story in it, because I mean, like I was saying before, the story in Doom for me is just you playing it. There isn't like an explicit, this is the story of Doom Guy and his adventures on Mars or whatever else. It's just whatever your experience is when you're playing it. So for that reason, I guess when I'm actually making the maps, I put enough detail in there to make it feel like these are real places, even though it's Doom, and of course they look like a 30-year-old video game that's made out of boxes and whatever.
Yeah.
But just enough detail to make it feel like these are kind of functional spaces that would exist even if you weren't there. Like the monsters are doing something here, even when you're not around, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean that's why I like to put toilets in my maps, because it's just like it's just instant functionality and immersion. It just makes you think, oh well, the monsters obviously need to go to the toilet somewhere. So
There's great truth in a toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like the intensive detailing that you do, does that like what is sort of your process for creating a room in Doom? Like, you said that you plan a lot of stuff out, including sort of your monster use and things like that. When does the detailing occur? Is that sort of as you go, or do you have set piece concepts planned out? Or
what I found with the best way of doing it, I think, because when I did the eye, that was all kind of map first and then monsters second kind of thing. But something I learned over time was to just do the gameplay first, and then the detail can come later.
Mm-hmm.
Because the gameplay is kind of more important to me, really. And if you start kind of messing around with a lot of sector lighting and whatever, and then you have to change stuff because the gameplay isn't working, it's just a pain in the bum. So the first thing I do is to just do the whole map from beginning to end with no textures, no lighting, but everything is functional. All the monsters are there, all the equipment is there, and all the lifts work and the doors work. But it's all just very basic, like squares and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so once that's all working and it's fun to play, then I can go back and start texturing and adding details and lighting and stuff.
Yeah. And it's interesting, sort of going back to the point you were talking about earlier about wanting to make spaces that looked sort of lived in or like grounded in reality a little bit. It's interesting that like for Doom, you want to have that aspect of being grounded in reality. Is that element to enhance the contrast between like your more like weird visual elements, do you think? Because your videos are not very sort of centered on reality, it feels like.
Well, you say that, but they kind of are, because what they're doing is they're taking reality and just rearranging it.
Sure.
And it looks weird because it looks particularly weird because you can see that it's normal and it's in the wrong configuration.
Mm-hmm.
If it was just completely kind of surreal blobs or whatever, then it wouldn't really mean much. But because it's what you're familiar with, but it's in the wrong place, that's what kind of makes it feel a bit weird to people, I think.
Mm.
So I guess, I mean, and in a similar way, it's weird to see a toilet in the middle of a game where you're shooting space monsters and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So like, it's more kind of a surreal thing going on, I guess.
Yeah, that element of like the uncanny of like I've been here before, but I haven't been here before, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that whole concept of like going down where this guy's going into this building and he's just killing monsters on every floor because it's his job, and he gets a phone call from his mum and he says, "Yeah, this is what I do for a living," kind of thing.
Yeah.
I just go into buildings and kill the monsters for whatever reason. It's just a kind of it's like reality. It's like you have the mundane aspect to it, but also the kind of the crazy killing monsters part of it as well.
You know, you're describing going down in this way, and I'm thinking now, I wonder if the developers of Hotline Miami ever played Going Down, because I'm seeing a lot of parallels
I
there.
haven't played that. Is that a similar thing?
Oh, you haven't played it? It's like it's on FPS. It's like a top-down. I don't know how you'd describe it, like a top-down action game, or it's based on like sight lines. So you're sort of trying to dodge the sight lines of enemies, and everything sort of kills you very quickly, but you kill everything very quickly. So you have to move very fast and sort of point to point killing stuff. But you know, you get these phone calls throughout. There's sort of elements of surrealism in it, and so there's some similar threads. I think you might enjoy it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like games that kill you too easily. To be honest, I like to be able to make a lot of mistakes when I'm playing.
Yeah, I can't even remember if it has like difficulty settings or anything. I think it is all just sort of the one experience. So you're talking about making encounters, like pre-planning your encounters and stuff. For me, when I make stuff, I tend to do a bit of a mix of both, where I'll make some geometry, and as I'm building, I build in like monster closets, and I think about what monsters will work in the space and do that kind of thing. Is that what you tend to do, or are you actually on paper, like, you know, 10 revenants here and sort of stuff?
Yeah, no, the way I do it is, I mean, I don't like note things down on paper or anything. It's all in my head. But what I'm doing is just thinking through the experience of the player, like kind of like directing a movie or writing a story. You think, right, this is what I want to happen here. The player's going to go open this door, and there's going to be a thing there, and he's going to go and shoot it, and that will wake up a thing there, and so I'm kind of orchestrating the whole experience in that way. So I mean, there might be bits where I'm just kind of trying things out, but mostly I'm always thinking about it in those terms, where I know this is how the player will react, this is what they'll see, and they'll probably run over here, so I want this specific thing here to counter that, and it's kind of like building a puzzle almost, where you've got all the pieces and you're putting them in specific places, so that this particular path or different paths will evolve out of that.
Yeah, it is. When you're testing your maps and stuff, it's definitely a little chess-like, where you're trying to guess, like like the player is almost your opponent, and you're trying to figure out, well, if they do this, I need to do this to stop them from doing this.
It's quite fun. It's an interesting process when you have a map that has so many different pathways through it, and so many different options for the player, because you have to kind of imagine them all and try and build different kind of things happening around what they're doing. I mean, some of the biggest headaches I have in my maps are where I have ambushes that will only happen if a player has done a specific thing there and a specific thing there, and if they have only done one of them, then something else will happen instead. So it just gets really complicated.
Yeah. Do you ever sort of think about like speed runners at all, or is that never sort of factored in?
I try to, because speedrunners are the kind of one of the foundations of the whole Doom community, who keep it alive, kind of thing. So I try not to annoy them too much. I know that my maps are probably not speedrun friendly in terms of the amount of RNG that I put into them.
Right.
But I try not to like annoy them by having really grindy bits or kind of obnoxious stuff where you have to wait for ages for stuff. But at the same time, I like to have these kind of little story scenarios that maybe kind of slow things down a bit, like the submarine rising out of the sea in Overboard. that's going to be kind of annoying to speed run, where you have to wait for that to happen every time. But there's not really much I can do about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you can't always like accommodate one part of your player base all the time. You kind of have to split it.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, there's so many different ways to play Doom. All you can really do in the end is give everyone the tools to make their own fun out of it. And as soon as you start kind of forcing people to play in a particular way, it just annoys other people, and I don't know. It kind of goes against the whole ethos of Doom. I think they made Doom specifically so that you can play it in any way that you want. I mean, the fact that you can save the game at any point just means, like, any kind of ammo balance or difficulty balance just goes out the window as soon as you allow people to do that. But they still allow people to do it because they just think, well, people can make their own fun out of it, you know.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people would probably define you by sort of your very high level of detail, as well as like the humor and stuff, and the Doom cute aspect to your maps. What do you think like defines your style personally?
Don't know. I mean, you say that my maps have a high level of detail, but I don't really. I mean, I see other people's maps that are really kind of finely crafted and amazing looking, and I'm not really kind of aspiring to that level of detail, but just kind of enough and in the right spots to make it to get the idea across, you know. Because I find when I'm playing maps, a lot of the time I'm just running through rooms without even looking at stuff.
Yeah.
So there's not really much point in making every room a complete masterpiece. I'd rather have things kind of simple in some rooms to enable more functionality of sector moving and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a kind of a mixture of little moments of detail and more kind of simple areas that are just easier to move through and fight in, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't really thought about what my particular style is, because I don't know. I just make what I want to make, and I mean that's how I do everything, you know. I just make what I want to make, and I don't really think beyond that.
yeah, definitely. I suppose like what do you sort of I guess that's a difficult question to think about, really.
Well, it's kind of like the thing people always ask artists, like, where do you get your ideas from, and what is your creative process or whatever. And when you're an artist, you don't think about any of that. You just do stuff, and it either works or it doesn't. You don't think why. You don't think, right, I am an artist who specialises in this, that, and the other for this particular reason. You just do things because you want to do them, and that's just good enough.
Yeah, for sure. But do you think normally, like when you were making Going Down, for instance, or Overboard, maybe Overboard even more so because it has like a lot of these sort of little set pieces, were you trying to sort of have like one or two interesting little set pieces, like visual moments per map, or like was that part of the planning process, or did they happen more naturally, like as you were building spaces?
Well, Overboard was, I guess that it had kind of events in it that I wanted to get across, like the ship sinking and the submarine rising, just things to explain where you are and why you're here, and what's going on. So those kind of things are pretty much planned, because the whole thing is planned as a kind of a story. This is going to happen. This is going to happen, kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, I guess that stuff. I mean, that's not stuff that I would like think. Oh, I might add this, while I'm making it, kind of thing. That's that, because that stuff is always so complicated. You have to know it's going to be there from the start, because you can't weave it in afterwards, kind of thing. Like the second map of Overboard, where that ship appears out of nowhere.
Right.
And that was just so kind of difficult to figure out, with all the sectors moving and stuff. I had to, those kind of things you have to build in right from the start, because they're going to be a problem at some point. So you have to solve them before you can start doing anything else, really.
Well, speaking of sort of convoluted boom trickery, I was wondering if you sort of remembered the the building process, and when the concept came about for map 26 of going down Insanity.
Oh man, that map.
Yeah.
Well, like that. With all the maps in going down, it was planned from the start that there would be one at that point where the whole map would transform into another map. And I mean, I was kind of half looking forward to it and half dreading it. And when it came time to actually making it, I think that map probably took the longest to actually build than any of the others, maybe. And yeah, the headache of that, Jesus, because you have to build the first map, then you have to cut it up into the second map and transform it in the editor into the second map, so that you can do all the gameplay that will happen in the second map. And then you have to unmake it in the editor back to the first map again, just so that you can test it. So even like testing it is a nightmare, because I can't even remember how I did that, because you can't just keep unbuilding and building the map every time you want to test it out. So I think what I probably did, after making the first map and then transforming it into the second map in the editor, I probably just tested the second map until that worked, and then made it back into the first map and did that. I'm thinking, I mean, it helped that the first map was very, very basic. It was just like lots of squares, basically, with a few monsters running around. If it was any more complicated than that, then I'm not sure my brain could have handled it. But yeah, that was a tricky one.
It's interesting that you set yourself this goal and actually followed through with it once you discovered how much work it was, because I think a lot of people would have been just put off too much to even continue.
This is why you do these things, because you know that nobody else is ever going to do it, and if no one else does it, then it's never going to be done. So somebody has to. So I just figured I'm going to have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had those moments too of Fracture World has a couple of weird boom kind of mechanics in it that I hadn't seen done before and wanted to put in, but they were a real pain in the ass to get put together. It's cool though, because a boom is it's kind of ideal for me, because it's halfway between vanilla and actual proper technical stuff that my brain can't even think about. And I mean, in a sense, vanilla is kind of can be more complicated, because you have to think about all the limitations that you have. So there's a lot of stuff you can't do, kind of thing. But with Boom, it has a lot of it has just enough functionality that you can do nearly everything, as long as you're prepared to find some really janky kind of workarounds and stuff. So it's you get a lot of problem solving, which is interesting. Yeah,
I like that side of it.
this is exactly what Rubik says when I talk to him about Boom. He's always saying the same thing.
Yeah, I love the whole thing with voodoo dolls. I wonder if that was actually, if they actually thought that was what was going to happen when they made Boom, because the whole voodoo doll thing, surely that's just like a quirk of the Doom engine that wasn't intentional or anything. It just happened to work like that.
It doesn't work. Well, you don't. I think they can activate triggers, right, in vanilla, but you don't have conveyors, because there are some weird things you can do to make it work that I've seen in recent years. But yeah, I guess maybe it was just the Boom added the conveyors, which added the ability to do it. I'm not actually sure.
Yeah.
But on sort of. Oh, sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, it's like with just by adding those conveyors, you can just do pretty much anything that. I mean, it almost becomes like programming, I guess, in the end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where you have like, oh, I don't know, I lost my train of thought there. Because I'm not only using voodoo dolls, I use a lot of monster triggers as well.
Yeah.
Which kind of complicates things, because I like the idea that a monster can trigger stuff in the map, but a monster can also choose like which direction it's going to go in. So then you can have like an either or kind of situation going on.
Yeah, I've started using that more recently in projects. There's a fight in. I've used this in a couple of different maps where I'll put arch files and pillars, but the arch files, they're actually like the pillars are elevators, and the arch files can activate them, so they remove your cover as they're running around, kind of thing. Which is kind of fun.
That's evil, right?
Well, in Fractured Worlds, it's actually even worse because the elevators have more arch files on them. So they come down and release another arch file, and then you have to deal with that. So.
I do love it in maps when the monsters can actually activate stuff. It just makes the whole thing feel a lot more alive.
Yeah, well, one of the things I always liked about Doom over its contemporaries was that despite the monsters being sprites, I think because of how many extra angles they have compared to a lot of other games, like their frames, they feel a lot more like solid and real, I guess, like when you hit them. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it helps that they actually modelled them off actual 3D sculptures or whatever.
Yeah. But I think, having stuff that they can activate sort of lends to them feeling more like they're physically a part of the space, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, and it gives them more agency as well. I mean, that was one of the things I always loved about Doom back in the day, which is something you didn't really see in a lot of other video games, is that if the monsters were just left to their own devices, they just wander around. And if you left them, if you didn't kill them and went off and did something else, you might bump into them later in a completely different part of the map. And it just makes them feel like they are actual kind of alive things.
Yeah, oh, there's Steve again. Saw him earlier.
Yeah.
So sort of back to the functionality of Boom. So I guess looking at your animation style and your Doom maps, do you think part of what you like about Boom is like the visible moving parts of it? Do you think it sort of feeds into like the way you do animation and stuff like that? Is that why you didn't venture into using like Z-Doom with scripting and all this stuff?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the way I make animations, you can script a lot of that stuff, but I never bother. I like to see what things are doing. I like to see the keyframes that tell you when something starts moving, when it stops moving.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it gives you a lot more control in that way.
Yeah. Is there something about like the tactile element as well? Like something a bit more physical, like the representation of it?
I guess, yeah. Well, it turns the whole thing into a big kind of machine. You know, it's like where you can see all the moving parts that are making everything happen.
Yeah. I did sort of want to talk about your animation a little bit before we get into Overboard, just for the
Yeah.
chronology, you know.
Oh, right.
Because obviously it's a huge part of your life, and you know,
Yeah.
a big part of like your creativity in general. I suppose like watching your animation and I guess not knowing too much about the background of it, I definitely saw like a decent amount of perhaps inspiration from like Monty Python and Terry Gilliam. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we kind of, I guess we came from a similar direction to the style we use because I was watching a documentary about it, I think once, where Gilliam was talking about like why he uses like cut out bits of artwork and animates in that way, and it is basically because it's quicker and easier because they had to churn out like a new episode every week kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was similar for me where I I started using photos of stuff and animating those just because it meant I don't have to draw stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just quicker. If I have an idea and then I just want to see it happen, if there's a lot of messing about to make it happen, then I kind of start losing interest. So it has to kind of be quick and easy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And when do you think your interest in like surrealism began as like something you wanted to look into artistically, I guess?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I sometimes think about this because I'm not sure I even think about my stuff as being surreal, but I mean it obviously is. But for me, it's just a different way of looking at the world, and the world is just weird anyway. If you
Yeah.
think about it in a certain way, so I'm kind of it's it's you know I used to play with Lego a lot when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and when you bought a Lego car or whatever, you'd see a picture on the front of the thing you're going to build, but on the back it always had pictures of other stuff you can make with the same bricks,
Yeah, yeah.
and that was the big kind of appeal of it to me. And it's pretty much what I'm doing with my animations.
Yeah.
I'm taking the world and I'm cutting it up into different bits and sticking them back together so just to make something else out of it.
Yeah. Well, I did watch sort of in preparation for this. I watched another interview with you, and you went to this museum where they had like all these dead animals and stuff in jars and things like that. And I guess it made me think that maybe a lot of it was just that like a lot of your sort of art was more just about sort of seeing interesting things and then wanting to kind of just integrate that in a style that you knew how to work with, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean it's all about just making interesting looking stuff, and in the end that is going to mean making stuff that looks weird because weird is just interesting. It's like the opposite of normal, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny sort of reading the comments because everyone's like, oh, this like animation he made clearly is a reference to this and he's making a statement about this, and I guess it happens to everyone, but I think in that I think in that interview you were pretty like, I can't remember which one you were talking about, maybe the video with the cows, and you said you didn't really have any idea where that video came from. It just sort of came together.
Yeah, sometimes they do, you know. Sometimes I'm just kind of experimenting with bits and pieces, and it kind of grows into something else. And so then I iterate on it, and it grows into something else, and then that bit just turns into a whole series of things that become a video.
Yeah.
Other times I'll have the full concept in my head at the start, and then I'll have to probably do like a storyboard for it. If there's anything that involves like a story or characters, then I'll have to plan it all in advance just so that I know what's going to happen at every point. But sometimes you just make stuff up as you go along.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously music and rhythm are really important to your videos, and they add to the sort of surrealistic quality, and especially for your Doom mods as well. Like going down, I think going down would be like it would be a much more normal megawad, really, if it didn't have the music that goes along with it. I was curious, like, where your musical inspiration comes from.
Yeah, well, I don't know. My music is, I mean, I'll say it now, it's a bit of an acquired taste.
Right.
And I'm cool that a lot of people don't like it, which is, I'm fine with that. But it's basically, I started making music just because I hated all the music that there was, and I wanted to make something.
All the music. I don't think I've ever heard that one.
Yeah,
Before.
well, I grew up in the 80s, and pop music in the 80s just went totally terrible as far as I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So I just felt like I had to make stuff that was different from what I was hearing all the time. And yeah, I guess that evolved into the weird, crazy circus music that I put on everything now. But
right,
I don't know.
And
it's just I just like music that takes you on a weird kind of unexpected journey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that summarizes everything I do pretty much. I'm taking you on a weird, unexpected journey somewhere.
Does the music often come first in terms of Doom or an animation, or do you always have, your map or your animation first and then you pair music with it afterwards?
When I'm making an animation, I tend to have the music first because the music inspires the visuals. And it also acts as a kind of a almost like a storyboard in a way.
Yeah.
So I know, like, because I'm timing everything in the animation to the rhythm of the music and the changes in the music. So I'll need to use the music to know when scenes are finishing and when movement is happening and stuff. So it's kind of important to have the music to begin with.
Yeah.
When I'm making Doom maps, I think it's more a case of, well, I'll have an idea of what the music will be for a map, but I generally make the music after I've actually made it.
Yeah.
But I'll kind of know in advance that, well, this map is going to be like fast paced and it's going to have this kind of atmosphere. So this is the kind of music it will have eventually.
Mm-hmm. I think. Well, you might be interested to know about MBF 21, which you might have missed out on having been away for a while, but it's sort of new format. I've
read things about that. Is it some kind of new kind of mapping format?
Yeah, so it sort of retains like all the boomisms, so it's still fundamentally Boom, but it sort of fixes a few problems that Boom had with some functionality, and adds like a lot of features that you can use. But one of the big ones is you can actually, Boom could already do music changes, so you could actually trigger music changes in your map, but they would break when you saved and loaded. It wouldn't work correctly. But that's fixed in MBF 21. And I suppose I was just thinking, for you who likes to have this kind of evolution through their maps, that definitely might be something you're interested in.
Wow, changing music. Yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. I'm trying to think. I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine like, I guess if you had like a boss fight in the middle of a map and you wanted the music to change, then that would work. But yeah, because then you could like trigger not even music. You could like trigger any kind of a sound to happen at a certain point, and then just start the music differently afterwards or something.
Yeah, you could
That'd be
probably use
interesting.
it for ambient sounds and things like that, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, say like in Overboard, when you get the gas can and you get back to the boat and you start it up, you could have like the sound of the. Well, you could have that anyway, actually. But
Yeah, Boom usually has a way, a much jankier way, but a way.
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, part of what I like about the tools that I use now is that they do have limitations that I have to work within.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have said that's why they didn't transition into like GZ Doom and stuff, was because
Yeah,
you end up with the sort of paradox of choice kind of where it's just too much shit to deal with.
yeah. If there's too many choices, then you always make the wrong choice.
Yeah, something like that. So I noticed that you used to actually stream your animations on Twitch. I watched a decent chunk of it. Just sort of really interesting seeing your process. Did you have any plans to do any more of that?
Not really. I did it kind of like as an experiment, just to see if what it would be like to talk about this stuff and look at some of these old projects that I'd done.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly what I found was I'd open a project and think, what the hell is going on here? I don't, because I don't know. It's just, I don't really, I guess I don't think about what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So once I've done it, then I kind of look at what I've done and it's like, God, how did I even do that? What does this all mean? It's very confusing. But I guess it's just interesting to show people the chaos behind the scenes, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I found after doing a bunch of them that I started getting a bit bored with them, and I wasn't really saying anything new with them. So I thought I'll give it a rest now, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose if you were to sort of try to start a new project and sort of stream that process, then it might kind of mess with it a little bit, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that wouldn't really work because I mean, you sometimes it's like those videos you sometimes see where artists have like do a time lapse of drawing a picture and it all kind of builds itself and it looks really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't work with what I do because there's so much downtime. Like you might kind of just sit there watching a thing repeating over and over again for 10 minutes. That's not going to be interesting for anyone to watch.
Right. I had heard. I feel like there are a lot of comments with like a bit of a wry smile from people who know about animation who are like, "Oh, this guy's using only Adobe After Effects. Look at this guy, and he's making like these crazy things." But obviously, I don't know anything about it. Is your process like a bit different to most other people in your field?
Yeah, I definitely think I'm using that software in a way that it wasn't meant to be used.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are probably other animation tools out there that are a lot more kind of geared towards what I'm doing. But I don't know. It does everything I need it to do. So I just keep pushing it and pushing it, and yeah, sometimes it struggles a bit with what I'm trying to make it do. But that's part of the fun, I think.
Yeah, bit like George R. Martin with his like old word processing computer that runs DOS or whatever, and that's what he writes all his books on.
Ha! Yeah, yeah, and it's just what I'm used to now. So, I mean, I'm still using a version of After Effects that's like 10 years old, I think.
Right. I was like that with Doom Builder for a long time. I just refused to update every time it asked me to, and I was just sat on this version that was like 2 years old or something.
Yeah, you feel like if it works, then just keep using it. But then I recently used the new Doom builder, and it's like all this extra stuff that's really useful. So
Yeah. Inevitably, that does happen when you begrudgingly hit the update button, but you know, you lose your sense of smugness at that point, and there's no fun to it. Do you have like a pretty set amount of time for your videos, or do they vary greatly in like production length when you're doing it?
Oh, right, time to make them.
Yeah.
When I first started, I'd take maybe like a month to make a video, but as the videos as I started getting more and more ambitious with the animation, they started getting longer and longer to make. So these days, I mean, the last music video I made took maybe like 3 months, but that was like pretty full on. There was loads of moving parts to it and stuff. Yeah. But that's probably the limit. Beyond that, and I start getting like really bored with projects.
You find there's like diminishing returns at that point.
Yeah, and then I've got the problem where if I know a project is going to take that long, then I'm less likely to start working on it.
So like the videos on your channel, like there are a couple that have over 100 million views. I think there are at least 2 that have 150 million views or something. Have you found that it's like
that's quite inexplicable, really? I mean, the most viewed one is just the one with my cat meowing.
Yeah.
And I don't even know why that has so many views. It seemed like just one day the YouTube algorithm decided this video I'm going to show it to everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't really have any control over that. And from the amount of dislikes it got, I get the impression that a lot of people didn't know what they were expecting to see when they clicked on the video.
That's really funny.
And they're like, what?
I think that's almost a testament to it, though, that it made that many people uncomfortable. That's kind of funny. Yeah,
well, I always say, dislikes, I don't mind if people dislike stuff, as long as they have a reaction to it. That's the intention,
Do you kind of subscribe to the sort of like art doesn't have to be beautiful kind of thing?
I guess so. I've never heard that phrase. What does it mean exactly?
Well, I guess, like, I think there are a lot of people who are like, well, like, art is when the painting looks like the seaside and it looks really nice or whatever. But then, you have stuff like, I don't know, Duchamp or something putting a urinal in an art gallery or whatever. And I suppose the point is, like, it can be hideous and not necessarily make you feel that great, but it's still art kind of thing.
I don't know. I feel like art, it should mean something to people.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't explicitly mean anything, then it's kind of failed in its message. So I think there should be a degree of thought put into things in that respect. You can't just kind of get a bag of rubbish and empty it on the floor in an art gallery and say, yeah, there's my bit of art, and it means whatever you want it to mean or whatever. I don't know. I think you have to have something that you're trying to communicate with what you're doing. And if you're not getting that across, then you obviously haven't thought about it enough or put enough effort into what you're making, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, if you end up with something that does look horrible, I mean, horrible looking things, well, there's different kinds of horrible, I guess, and there's beauty in anything, really. I mean, even the most grotesque kind of horrible things you can think of can look amazing in a certain way, I guess. I don't really know what I'm talking about now. I'm just going.
I thought you had a big revelatory statement to make, but I guess not.
Yeah, these aren't really things I think about much
More of a doer.
So I don't have a particular opinion waiting to.
Yeah, no, that's totally
express.
You have a video on YouTube called Indigestion, and the mouth in it definitely reminded me of the giant mouth that you built in Going Down. Was that the inspiration for the animation at all, or was it just like a theme?
I can't remember when I made that video, but and if it was like at a similar time. I'm not sure, but I mean that whole idea of mouths and teeth and stuff is just something I like anyway. I've always liked putting that kind of imagery in my stuff because it is disturbing for some reason.
Yeah, well, the eye is also, I suppose, built around a lot of that kind of imagery. There's similar sort of big monsters crafted out of stock textures and that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up at a time when body horror was a big thing in films and stuff with David Cronenberg and that kind of thing. So the idea of fleshy mutations and bodily malfunctions is just kind of weird and interesting to me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Cronenberg, actually. Given sort of your animation style and things like that, because I having heard that now, I can definitely see how that could have inspired.
Yeah, he really kind of tapped into that whole idea of the body kind of going wrong, kind of thing. I guess because that was a time back in the 80s when you had things like the AIDS virus and also DNA had become quite a big deal back then, and people were in the public consciousness. People were starting to realize that there was this weird, almost like a computer code in your cells that was telling them all how to function properly, which was something that felt like quite a new idea in the public's kind of sense. And then Cronenberg made The Fly, which kind of played on that kind of weirdness, and it was just something that I found really fascinating, because in the same way that I'm editing my videos, you can kind of edit the genes that make things look how they look, and it's just an interesting thing. It's like building bodies using building blocks and stuff. I guess it's all kind of interrelated in some way with what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, that body horror element of it ties back into that kind of uncanny, like, you know, the body's supposed to look a certain way and now it doesn't, kind of thing, I guess.
But then what should it look like? What should things look like, and what is right and wrong? When you start thinking about that and looking at the world and all the weird, horrible creatures that are in it, you kind of realise that there is no normal in the end. It's just whatever works the best, you know?
Yeah, that's true. So you obviously took like a massive break from Doom, I think about 7 years or something, at least in terms of releases. I'm sure you were probably playing it on and off throughout that.
Well, I actually stopped playing it as well. I think that was the reason I stopped making maps, was basically because I'd moved on to other games, specifically, I guess, The Binding of Isaac, which I kind of discovered around then, and that led me on to other kind of roguelike kind of games. And the problem I have with Doom is that if I ever stop playing it for a length of time, I find it difficult to start playing it again because it makes me really motion sick.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, it's and I can work through that if I kind of play it enough, but there's always going to be a time when I'm playing Doom, it's making me feel a bit queasy if I haven't played it for a long time. So that kind of puts me off playing it if I haven't played it for a while.
That's
so that's probably one of the reasons why I stopped playing it. But also, I had played it quite a lot when I was mapping.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of binged on it for several years because during the 2000s I was still just playing the iWads. Like I didn't really start discovering custom maps until maybe 2010, maybe, I don't know. But by then I had like 15 or so years of content to catch up on. So I was just playing non-stop Doom and going through like decades of stuff and yeah, maybe I kind of just burned myself out on it after a while.
Yeah, I definitely find that that's happened to me, where I get burnt out and then I have to take a few months off, usually after big mapping projects and stuff. But I always end up coming back in the end.
Yeah.
It's
still a good game.
Oh, sorry, you go. There's Discord delay sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's still a game. It's still a good game to play, and I still enjoy it. I've just got other games to play as well.
Yeah, my girlfriend actually, she tried to play Doom and she got very motion sick and could not play it. So interesting that you managed to power through it.
Yeah, well, I get sick with a lot of first-person shooters. Doom is actually not so bad comparatively because the movement is quite fast and fluid.
Mm-hmm.
If there's any, like if you're using a controller, for example, a game controller, I just can't do that with first-person shooters because the movement isn't kind of responsive enough.
Mm-hmm.
And or if the movement is slow and if you're bobbing up and down in a weird way. But Doom, I kind of managed to power through it. Interesting.
Yeah. You might also be interested to know, because you're a roguelike fan, there is actually a fan-made Doom roguelike out there that I've seen people playing.
Really?
Yeah, so there you go. If you ever if you ever want to look for that one, you might enjoy it. It looked quite well put together, actually.
It's funny actually because Doom itself is kind of, I guess it's kind of inspired by the same things that the original Rogue game was based on. I mean, all those game devs probably came from a similar kind of D&D background.
Yeah.
And you can feel that in the original Doom maps where it is like they feel like one of those dungeons that you maybe drew when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. There's all these kind of weird little twisting caves and rooms off to the side and stuff. And so they're probably more related than it seems in the end.
Well, yeah, they've definitely talked about how they were inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, and the Cacodemon is obviously ripped straight from one of the monsters.
Yeah.
So what ended up sort of bringing you back to Doom eventually with Overboard?
I just felt like I felt like making a map for old time's sake, basically. But also, I think I'd been watching some playthroughs of people playing Going Down, and watching it again made me realise there's a lot of stuff in it that there's a lot of good stuff, but there's stuff in it that I wasn't quite happy with.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, I was thinking, maybe I should do like a I don't know, a director's cut of Going Down, like changing things to be more like how I want them to be now. But then I always think, well, if you're not happy with something you've done, then just make something new. You know, don't keep trying to remake something that you've already made. Just make something new. Mm-hmm. So that's when I made a new map, and then that turned into a series of maps. Because that's just how my brain works, I guess. I can't just make a single map because then I start thinking about, well, I made this like island that you explore, but then I thought, well, how does he get to this island? like, does he come by a boat? And where's that? Why is he traveling on a boat to an island? So then I start thinking, well, maybe he was on a shipwreck. So then I have to make the map of the ship. And then I think, well, you can't just have just one island. You've got to have a series of islands or something. And so yeah, it's just kind of all built out of that basically.
Yeah, and having played it, the maps are, I mean, they're incredibly fun. They're quite small and fast, and I think like momentum is a primary design element for them.
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of is one thing I'd change about Going Down. I think is that the maps are small in Going Down, but they don't feel very fast paced to me because there's just so much. There's so much to kill in them. I kind of the original concept for Going Down was that I wanted it to be like a megawatt that you could play through the whole thing in like an hour and a half, like super fast.
Right, like side.
But then, but then when I came to making it, I just thought it'd be funny because I was making these small maps to just see how many monsters I could cram into them, and so then it became like that, and now when I try playing it, it feels a little bit grindy to me because even though the maps are small, they still take the same length of time to play through as a general Doom map. So I think if I was going to make it again, I'd probably try streamlining it a bit more. But then I decided to just make a new thing. So that's what I tried to do with Overboard, was to just streamline that, kind of have a similar experience, but just make it faster and yeah, it worked pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing I noticed was that I was always led very well through the maps in terms of, oh, I need a rocket launcher, and then there would be like a little, gingerbread crumb trail to the rocket launcher of rockets or whatever. You did a good job of like pushing the player through the map to keep the momentum going. How much sort of planning and stuff went into like those types of elements of leading the player around?
Yeah, it's like how I was saying before, how I make these maps through a process of like film direction, where you're thinking about where the player's going to be going, what they're going to be looking at, and orchestrating the experience that they're going to have in a kind of a specific way. So it's kind of planned out in that respect, yeah. But at the same time, you want to give them the options to go off the path and do things in a different way if they want to.
Yeah, and you did a pretty good job with that too, I think, in terms of keeping the sandbox open with like extra weapon placements around, so if a player went one way, they could grab the super shotgun from a different point in the map or something.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's built is kind of like one thing leads to another thing leads to another thing. So you do kind of get drawn through in that respect, but yeah, you can just kind of double back and take a different route if you want to, and it'll still work.
And obviously, you have all these like fantastic little like animated set pieces, sort of built with boom building blocks, I guess, like the boat sinking and the submarine, and they have to be sort of seen. People should definitely go and play this WOD and see this. But were you constructing maps on kind of like a route where you get the player to see all these little pinpoint moments, or?
Yeah. I mean, that's a consideration. It's like on map, what is it, map 2, I think, where you go to grab the fuel can and it disappears, and specifically there's a window behind it that you're looking through where you see the revenants coming out of the boat that you're going to be dealing with next. So you are always thinking about where the player's going to be looking, what goal they're going to be like trying to achieve or whatever.
And Yeah, and also just seeing those like awesome visual elements that you've created, which sort of lend themselves to like the story. And I guess you said that were most of those sort of just constructed around, well, I have this theme of the ocean and boats and stuff, and so you just wanted those little animated set pieces because they fit with the theme, or were they all story driven, or
Kind of a mixture of both, I think. I mean, when I'm thinking about the whole adventure and thinking what am I going to put in it, and like, so I know there's going to be a ship at the start that you're actually on, and then you're going to start going on islands. So then I immediately think, well, what's going to happen to the ship? Why not kind of see it sinking, because that's easy enough to do, and and then I thought, well, just traveling to a bunch of islands isn't going to be massively interesting, so let's chuck I don't know, a submarine in, for example, and then you immediately think, well, how let's make the submarine rise up, like they do, kind of thing.
yeah,
Because it just makes it. I don't know. It just makes it all more kind of immersive, I guess.
yeah,
If that's the right word.
submersive.
Yeah.
uh, I guess speaking to those story elements, and without actually saying what it is or spoiling it in any way, because it's very good, but the ending of the WOD, did you have that in mind pretty early on, or was that like a bit of like a light bulb moment as you were sort of finishing the WOD up?
Now which ending are you talking about? Because
The true
there's
ending, I suppose.
the true ending. That that was I think that was an afterthought, maybe, because I don't know, actually, thinking about it, maybe I did have that planned. Let me think about it, because yeah, the whole thing with New Game Plus was I I didn't kind of think about people playing it consecutively. I thought about it like these would just kind of be harder versions of the maps that people could play if they wanted to. So they'd probably be just pistol starting and picking a particular one they wanted to play. But then, but by then I had the kind of the imp on the surfboard map,
Yeah, that's great.
which I thought was kind of amusing. And then I thought, well, if people are going to play the New Game Plus continuously, then it would make sense to have another kind of ending map at the end. And so then I kind of thought, well, I could just have the same thing again and make it a bit different or something. I don't know, like there's a cyber demon on the surfboard or something stupid.
Yeah.
But I think late in the project, I thought it would be fun to do something like I ended up doing, just as a kind of an Easter egg for people who did like fight their way through the whole thing.
So where did the idea for New Game Plus come from? Was that just from playing older games? Like, I know Streets of Rage 3 is a good example where you could play up to a certain point in that game on the easier difficulties, and you wouldn't actually get to the final, like the end of the game properly. You would have to go through and play it on the harder difficulty to get the proper ending. Was it that kind of thing?
Well, it was more to do with like my experience of watching people playing Going Down, really, because those maps are kind of quite brutal for a lot of players, and at the same time, everyone always goes straight to ultra violence when they're playing it. And
Yeah.
and I did like spend a fair amount of time making the lower difficulties work. So it always kind of disappointed me that I'd see players like really struggling and getting frustrated, but insisting on save scumming their way through the hardest difficulty anyway.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do with Overboard was make it into a more casual kind of experience, because in the end you just want people to play your WOD from like
Yeah.
beginning to end. You don't want to like frustrate them and stop them from playing. And so I thought, well, what I could do is just make the maps just fun to play and not too difficult, and then have like an extra version of them all that's more kind of hardcore, that I can, because I knew it's only going to be 6 maps, so I had plenty of space left to just repeat them and have harder versions.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that way, kind of everyone would be happy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it just came from there basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very common topic. It's been a problem for me as well because I generally make harder stuff, and I've also watched people playing my stuff on ultra violence when they definitely should not be, and they're just having a truly awful time. And I spent, like with my most recent project, I spent just as much time on the other difficulty settings for sure, and you know people never play. But
Yeah, I know. Yeah, what was I going to say? I can't remember now.
well, it's also something I talk to with Rubik's a lot. He's sort of well known for having he made a WOD called Magnolia, which again probably would have been in the period when you weren't playing much Doom, but he basically only released the WOD on Hermie Plenty, and then people could send him like a demo or like a video of them playing through it on Hermie Plenty, and he would send them Ultraviolence with like a little custom bonus map that he made for them, which was really cool.
Yeah. It's the thing about mapping, because you have this idea when you're a mapper that this thing you're creating, people are going to be just living in this world. They're gonna like play through it, and then they'll try and challenge themselves, so they'll play through it again. And the reality is that most people just play a world once, and then they'll move on to one of the hundreds of others that are out there. So because they're only going to play it once, they want to feel everything that it can possibly throw at them, which is probably why they go straight to ultra violence, pistol starts and stuff.
Yeah.
So I can kind of see the mentality from both sides. But the good thing about New Game Plus being like separate maps is that you can actually alter the geometry of the levels as well to make them kind of extra different.
Yeah,
which is quite good.
Yeah, I had noticed there were like a couple of little changes, like is it the final map? Maybe the second to last map. Like there's a BFG. There's like an extra little jut out on that platform with the BFG on it, and some extra.
Yeah, I mean, well, some of them I had to really re-engineer just to allow a cyber demon to walk through them.
Well, New Game Plus is no joke. I'll say that there are some areas that, especially I think the opening to map 2, that's probably one of the roughest starts in the WOD, I think.
Yeah, I'm still kind of tinkering with some of those maps as well, but I think I've pretty much got them all nailed down how I want them.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, one of the reasons I forgot to actually get to my point, but one of the reasons I brought up Magnolia and Rubik's was that he said that he had actually had the same sort of idea of splitting the WOD up into 2 different WODs, like one for UV and one for Hermie Plenty kind of thing, or like 2 separate things like you've done with this. But he said he didn't want to edit 2 separate maps because it would have been too much of a pain.
Yeah, that is a pain in the bum, I have to say. When you have a bug that you need to fix on one map, and then you have to fix the same thing on the other version.
Mm-hmm. Have you sort of delved into any newer PWODs since you've come back to playing Doom, or not really? Was it mostly just for mapping purposes?
Not at all, no. I've not been. I mean, I check out the CAC awards every year just to see what people have been making and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm totally out of the loop as far as what people are making these days.
Mm-hmm. And do you think Overboard has kind of like scratched your Doom itch for quite a while, or do you think you might make some other little maps?
Probably, I think that's going to be enough for a while at least. It's been fun though. I forgot how fun it is just making these maps, even though I'm not playing Doom. It's just fun making an experience for somebody else, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely make stuff because I enjoy playing the game, but once you get it to other people, that's when the real enjoyment actually kind of begins.
Yeah, and it's fun just that the feeling of like solving problems and stuff like that is quite cool as well.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with Boom, with voodoo doll mechanics, which can be very problematic.
Yeah, God, one of the big problems I had to solve was on which map was it? Map 6 of Overboard, where I have like a whole army of imps invading from the sea, and I thought, well, I'll just put lifts everywhere that they can use to get so they can like traverse the whole island. And then I realised that it just didn't work because one imp would get on the lift, and then as soon as it rose up, the imp behind him would activate the lift again, so it would just go down. Yeah. And then the imp behind couldn't actually get on the lift, so it would go up again, and this lift would just be going up and down without the imps being able to go anywhere. So I had to make this really convoluted behind the scenes mechanic where there was like a delay with if an imp like activated a lift, there'd be a delay before they could actually activate it again to give the other imp the time to actually get off of it. So yeah, it's all very kind of janky, but it's fun to like figure these things out and make them work.
Yeah, I don't know why, but it's the way you describe the situation, and I don't know, from when you were talking earlier, I suppose, about like monsters having their own agency and do maps and stuff, that scenario is a lot funnier to me in that context.
Yeah. Like I mean, it was hilarious to actually watch.
Like they're factory employees or something, you like can't solve a problem and you're having to like implement these systems. But yeah, I suppose on the topic of Doom monsters, to get to the final question, the one you've definitely not been waiting for, because I feel like it's not actually that exciting of a question, but it'll probably have the same answer that everybody's given, but we'll see. What is your favorite Doom monster and why?
Right. Well, I think I'd have to say that my favorite Doom monster is the Imp.
Oh, okay.
For a particular reason, which is that the Imp is a monster that it's safe to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important to have. I think that's one of the fundamental things in Doom, that there are monsters that you can ignore, because then you can kind of you can put them to one side and go and fight other stuff. A lot of the Doom monsters you can't ignore. You have to deal with them immediately. So then it becomes a thing of, right, which one is the worst that I have to deal with in this particular situation. And the Imp, you can just forget about them, and because you can forget about them, they become this kind of threat that builds up in the background until it's too late, and suddenly you're surrounded by imps that you haven't dealt with. And I think that's just kind of, I don't know. I think it's fundamental to what I like about Doom, because when I used to play it back in the 90s, I one of the fun ways of playing it was to charge through the map as fast as you could, and often you'd have to. I mean, you'd have to deal with the shotgunners and the hit scan stuff, because otherwise it would just keep damaging you. But imps, you could just forget about them and move on. But then once you've grabbed your key and you go back, suddenly you're meeting all these imps that you'd forgotten about.
Yeah.
And it just gives the map a kind of an extra kind of living dimension, I think.
Yeah, I think in like more slaughtery stuff, they're definitely used as like kind of a space occupier. Like you might have like 100, 1,000 imps or whatever in a big clump, and the person's like natural inclination is to ignore the imps, I think, because and then they'll be like, I got to deal with the cyber demons or whatever. But really, you want to kill the imps to create space for yourself to move. So that element of ignoring them becomes like a problem for you in those types of situations.
Yeah, and not many. I mean, that's one of the things one of the reasons I kept coming back to Doom even after they introduced Quake and all the games that came afterwards. I always found that there was something about Doom that these other games were missing, and I think it is just that Doom had enemies in it that were very easy to kill and just fun to kill for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only game I played that I had the similar experience with was maybe Left 4 Dead, with all the zombies. Individually they're not much of a threat, but there's just hundreds of them. But you can just mow them all down with a machine gun. So it's just kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as soon as Quake came along, it looked a lot better than Doom. But immediately the enemies were all they felt a bit more tanky and a bit more lethal. And suddenly you had to think about how you were going to fight them and stuff. And yeah, I don't know, it lost something in the process, I think. I think games after that, they tended to have less monsters that had more intelligence.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It took some of the mindless fun out of it, I think.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if you played Halo, but I think grunts are maybe a little bit similar. They're like a little enemy that you can sort of ignore, but they become quickly very irritating if you leave too many of them. They are a bit similar.
Yeah, I guess you could call them popcorn enemies.
Right.
It's just
right.
like something to blow up an explosive barrel or something.
Yeah, you like to do a lot of that in Overboard, actually. It's very satisfying.
Yeah.
Have you played any of the modern Dooms, actually? The 2016 and Doom Eternal?
I played the 2016 one. I started playing it and I didn't really get on with it.
Mm-hmm.
I found the thing it did where suddenly the camera was yanked out of your control so that it could show you this little animation of you ripping a demon's head off or whatever.
Yeah.
That just really annoyed me. Yeah. I always like to feel like I'm in control of what I'm doing. And it's just suddenly having to, here, look, you have to look at this. You have to look at this now. Stop what you're doing. I just find it annoying, and it also doesn't help if you do get motion sick with these games to suddenly not have control over where you're looking and stuff. But then I tried to play it without, because you can play it without like activating all those little cutscene things, and you could tell that they'd engineered the game where you pretty much had to do that just to get all the kind of the benefits from it. I don't know, like ammo or health or whatever it gave you. So I didn't really have much fun with it. And then it started making me have to jump to places, and I just couldn't get on with that at all.
So you don't like platforming in classic Doom?
I'm not a fan of platforming in Doom. it's it doesn't really work, I don't think.
Mm. I think it's definitely an acquired taste, a very acquired taste. You have to play a lot of Doom.
I mean, the way I play Doom, I'm not looking downwards, so I can't see where my feet are anyway.
Oh yeah.
So it's not like you can jump very accurately and stuff.
Yeah, you definitely need to create platforming that's specifically fun in the Doom engine, which is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and in the end, I'm just here to kill monsters. I'm not here to like struggle actually moving through the map.
That's fair.
So that stuff just takes me out of it a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely used to be the same way. I think I've gotten a little more okay with it these days. Usually as a pacing thing, a way to sort of break maps up. I kind of like it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Cool.
I sort of took advantage of the timing window of you being interested in Doom again, and I wasn't sure you'd respond, but I mean, you were very quick to respond, and I was very happy that you did. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to talk about stuff that isn't related to animation and things, because making Doom maps is fun, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that I inundated you with animation questions in the middle of the interview, but I did feel I had to touch on it
Yeah.
a bit. But yeah, thanks a bunch. I hope you sort of come back to Doom a bit quicker than last time, and maybe make some more stuff in the future, because I had a lot of fun playing Overboard. Definitely, so far my WOD of the year was it was really, really good. So.
Oh, cheers.
Yeah, well, thanks again. That'll do it for this episode. And I'll be back next time with another guest. See you later.